King Athelstan, Edward the Elder, and Athelflaed were key historical figures depicted within the Last Kingdom TV series. But it was only the death of Athelflaed that was displayed within the show. The death of Edward the Elder was ambiguously portrayed, and Athelstan's death is not depicted in any way or form by the conclusion of the Last Kingdom. But how exactly did Edward the Elder and King Athelstan die? Was the way in which Athelflaed's death depicted in the Last Kingdom historically accurate or not? To better answer these questions, we will be doing a deep dive into contemporary sources and modern theories which reference the death of these crucial historical figures from the House of Wessex. But before we begin, don't forget, if you want to learn more about the death of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel Historical Exit. When discussing the deaths of Athelstan, Edward, and Athelflaed, there is only a singular contemporary source which makes reference to the death of these descendants of Alfred the Great, and that is the historical text, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. Although these figures' lives, political, and military achievements are well documented, there is unfortunately very little exact details provided within the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles in regards to the deaths of these royal and noble figures. But nonetheless, we will start this video by discussing the death of Athelflaed, which was depicted exceptionally well within the Last Kingdom, and the manner of her passing within the show matches very closely to what the medieval sources say about her death. And that is the fact that Athelflaed died in the year 918 AD at 48 years of age, as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle states the following in regards to her passing. Here in this year, Athelflaed, the Lady of the Mercians, departed this life 12 nights before midsummer at Tamworth. As can be surmised from the limited historical context provided in the above statement, it would seem that Lady Athelflaed passed away in an unsuspicious and non-controversial manner. Therefore, the most logical inference that can be ascertained is that Athelflaed died from natural causes, perhaps an unknown illness or infection. This is also the discourse that is most widely purported by modern historians, as the consensus seems to be the combined factors of no alternative contemporary discourses, limited medieval medical knowledge, and Athelflaed's advanced age make her passing away from natural causes the most plausible discourse when considering her cause of death. However, things are not so clear-cut when one begins to discuss the death of her brother King Edward, as there seems to be a greater degree of controversy regarding this monarch's enigmatic passing. Again, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles provides only the barest of details concerning the end of Edward's life in the year 924 AD. In this year, King Edward passed away at Farndon in Mercia. Although there is hardly any detail provided in the above statement, there is an important piece of information within the quote which makes labeling the death of Edward as a result of natural causes not as indisputable as was the case for Athelflaed. And the critical information that needs to be further considered is the location of Edward's death, which is mentioned as Farndon near Mercia. Contemporary sources highlight that Edward was in the middle of a military campaign while he was in Farndon, and there is a possibility that Edward may have passed away from an injury or wound during the battle. Although no contemporary source purports this discourse outright, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles also does state that in this year, before midsummer, King Edward went with an army to Nottingham and ordered a borough to be made on the south side of the River Trent, over against the other, and commanded it to be occupied and manned. And then after that, during the harvest, he died at Farndon in Mercia. The ambiguity surrounding Edward's death has led modern historians to propose three theories on how Edward may have passed away, and in order of academic plausibility, the discourses are as follows: that Edward may have passed away from an unexpected and deadly illness, he perished due to a critical battle wound or injury, or lastly, and least likely, is that he may have been assassinated due to the high level of political turmoil in the region. I personally believe the discourse that Edward perished from an illness while on campaign as the most probable cause of death for the monarch, as I consider it highly improbable that no contemporary historians would have documented the event if Edward had indeed perished in battle or been assassinated. Therefore, with the limited evidence we have available regarding King Edward's death, it would be prudent to propose that Edward perished from an unknown illness, but it is not implausible to accept the discourses that he may have perished from battle injury or assassination as well. The final monarch we will be discussing will be the great King Athelstan, who was able to fulfill his grandfather's grand ambition of a united England under the rule of a monarch from the House of Wessex. Like the other figures in this video, the only contemporary source which makes reference to the death of Athelstan is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, with the historical text stating, "In this year King Athelstan, the ruler of all Britain, departed this life at Gloucester on the 27th of October in the 16th year of his reign, and he was buried in the church of St. Mary at Malmesbury." Again, the chroniclers of this annals do not give any hint or evidence of anything untoward or suspicious being a factor in the death of Athelstan, and this viewpoint seems to have been reinforced throughout the medieval time period as well, with the 12th century medieval text, The Deeds of the Kings of the English, further reinforcing the discourse that King Athelstan died peacefully from natural causes. As the text states, Athelstan ended his life at Gloucester in the 44th year of his age, in the 16th of his reign, on the 6th of Calends of November, having provided for his brothers and conciliated by his munificence the principal men of the whole kingdom. Thus, full of years and glory, he departed to Christ. Therefore, with the evidence we have available from contemporary and later medieval sources, it is with a high degree of certainty that one can accept the discourse that King Athelstan passed away on the 27th of October 939 AD from natural causes. So to conclude, based on the evidence and the details recorded within the medieval historical text, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, it is highly probable that both Lady Athelflaed and King Athelstan passed away from natural causes. However, when discussing the death of King Edward the Elder, again, natural causes seems to be the most likely culprit in his cause of death. But this discourse cannot be accepted definitively, as there is still a small possibility that Edward may have passed away from injury or assassination. But let me know in the comments down below if you found this video to be interesting and what other historical figures' death you would like for me to cover next. The pain was sharp, fierce and sudden, starting from his abdomen and shooting throughout the rest of his gut. Alfred fell to the floor, clutching his stomach, and with tears in his eyes began to pray that maybe this time the pain would subside quickly, or even better, perhaps the pain would become so great that it would just burst open his bowel and put an end to his suffering once and for all. King Alfred, better remembered to history as Alfred the Great, was the fearsome and intelligent King of Wessex who had grand ambitions and dreams of a united England. But he would pass away before he could see his illustrious goal fulfilled. However, the end for Alfred would not be quick, nor would it be painless. While Alfred was conquering the Vikings and defeating his many enemies, his body was conquering his will to live and was rapidly becoming his greatest foe. There are many discourses and theories present which have aimed at identifying the troubling illness which caused significant discomfort and pain to the great king for much of his life. In this video, we will delve deep into the predominating thoughts by contemporary medieval sources as well as modern historians into what illness or sickness may have been the most likely potential culprit of Alfred the Great's death. However, before we can proceed to comprehend the significance of King Alfred's death, it is first important to have a very basic understanding of Alfred's life, as this legendary monarch was a beacon of hope for all of Christendom and those opposed to Viking rule. Furthermore, by having a cursory knowledge of Alfred's reign and deeds, the impact of his death and passing on English history will possess much more significance for the viewer. Alfred was the fifth and youngest son of King Aethelwulf, the ruler of Wessex, and the chances of him becoming King of Wessex at the time of his birth seemed minuscule, as he had 4 healthy elder brothers ahead of him in the line of succession to inherit the crown. Being the youngest son of King Aethelwulf, though, benefited Alfred immensely, as this gave him the freedom to spend much of his childhood following his greatest passion, engrossing himself in the literature of the time, including poetry, historical documents, and religious texts to get a better understanding of war, politics, and religion. This heightened level of education, understanding, and knowledge would play a fundamental role in securing Alfred's legacy as one of the greatest monarchs in England's history. However, Alfred's childhood was not all roses and sunshine, as his own personal biographer Asser records in his work The Life of King Alfred that Alfred was a sickly child from his youth, and an undiagnosed chronic medical condition caused him much pain and discomfort for the duration of his life. However, Alfred did not let something as trivial as constant pain and distress from his chronic illness hinder his ambitions, and he would become a respected warrior king after defeating the invading Viking forces at the battles of Englefield, Ashdown and Edington. And by effectively utilizing his superior political acumen, martial prowess and his reputation as a wise and intelligent monarch, Alfred was able to halt Viking expansion and maintain an effective peace with the Vikings and many of his neighboring kingdoms. But as Alfred continued to grow in might, repute and power, his health would follow a reverse trajectory, and as he aged, his chronic illness became more increasingly difficult to manage and to ignore. As fierce as the willpower and fortitude of King Alfred was, even he could not withstand the pain protruding throughout his body, and he would eventually succumb to this chronic and now fatal illness in 899 AD at approximately the age of 50. But what was this mystery illness that for so long had troubled King Alfred and would ultimately take away his life prematurely? Fortunately for us, King Alfred's biographer Asser provides an in-depth first-hand account of the various symptoms Alfred suffered with as a result of his illness. Asser states in his biography of King Alfred that, but by the inspiration of God, and with the constant and unremitting pain of that disorder in the bowels which he always had, and that sometimes with such severity that it almost seemed to threaten his life, he never desisted from his vow, and through God's mercy he never has been overcome by this pain. This description of pain in the bowel is also highlighted by another statement in Asser's The Life of King Alfred. In the course of his whole life, through unknown attacks and frequent diseases of the mind, and also of the body, namely from the diseases of the bowel which caused him acute pain, and of another which he does not remember, for a full 20 years before he became king, and afterwards without intermission until he was 46. Therefore, based on the first-hand description of Asser's accounts of King Alfred suffering from severe bowel pain throughout much of his reign, the most popular and prevalent discourse by modern historians and medical professionals is that King Alfred may have suffered from a gastrointestinal disorder, such as Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, or hemorrhoidal disease. As there's clear evidence that King Alfred suffered from severe bowel pain throughout a prolonged period of his life. The common discourse of an inflammatory bowel disease such as Crohn's or ulcerative colitis makes perfect sense. It is impossible to state, based off the limited resources we possess about Alfred's health, to efficiently conclude which of these two types of inflammatory bowel disease may have been the source of Alfred's lifelong discomfort, as both illnesses possess a significant overlap of symptoms. Aside from both diseases causing severe abdominal and bowel pain, they share other symptoms such as rectal bleeding, weight loss, diarrhea, and many other similar features. Crohn's disease, however, differs from ulcerative colitis, as Crohn's can result in inflammation anywhere in the digestive tract from the mouth to the anus, where colitis occurs specifically in the large intestine. And another important factor to consider is that since Crohn's disease affects the larger part of the gastrointestinal tract, that many individuals suffering with this disease are more likely to present symptoms such as mouth sores and anal fissures, ulcers, tears, and narrowing. As harrowing as all those symptoms sound, they are just a small sample of the complications and issues irritable bowel disease can cause. So although we may never be able to conclusively determine if Crohn's or ulcerative colitis was the ultimate reason behind the death of Alfred, they are definitely high probable contenders based on the only contemporary sources we have available which make a reference to Alfred's health problems. A secondary theory which expands upon the inflammatory bowel disease discourse is that Alfred may have died from secondary infections or complications due to untreated Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. This again is a very probable discourse, as the poor sanitary conditions alongside the limited medical knowledge of medieval England made the risks of death from infections exceptionally high. When one considers the time of when Alfred lived, it is not improbable to consider that a mix of poor medical knowledge alongside a chronic illness could have led to an infection or another complication which ultimately took the life of Alfred the Great. The last theory which occasionally gets mentioned in regards to the illness that Alfred spent much of his life contending with may not have been a physical ailment but a psychosomatic illness instead. An unpopular and not well attested theory, but one that does have respected historians such as Hutchinson, Rubin and Alfred P. Smith supporting this thought process. I feel it is only fair that this theory should at least be discussed if not seriously considered. But the psychosomatic illness theory purports that King Alfred had to deal with immense emotional and psychological stress throughout his reign, especially internal court politics and constant Viking invasions, which took a massive toll on Alfred's mental health, and this manifested in physical symptoms which resulted in constant abdomen and bowel pain for the monarch. Again, it is important to reiterate that this theory is not seriously considered by a majority of historical scholars, and the general critique against this theory is that the physical pain that Alfred experienced during the end of his reign was tremendous, but his kingdom of Wessex was at peace and as stable as one could expect during medieval Europe. Therefore, his emotional and psychological stress would have been minimal considered to any other point of his reign, but the physical symptoms of his illness continued to increase in severity. So yes, it is definitely plausible to accept that mental and psychological stress from Alfred's duties as a monarch and a warrior king would definitely have made his illness worse. It is improbable to state that Alfred's chronic illness was wholly a psychosomatic development. So to conclude, the death of Alfred was a slow and brutal affair, and if his biographer Asser is to be believed, then the great monarch had to contend with severe abdominal pain for much of his reign. This leads the majority of historians to accept the premise that Alfred suffered from a chronic gastrointestinal disease such as Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. There is very little evidence to refute this theory, and it is the discourse which I believe explains the chronic illness of Alfred the best. But let me know in the comments down below if you agree that King Alfred died from an irritable bowel disease, or if you think there is some other explanation for his death that has not been considered in this video.
I am Uhtred, son of Uhtred.
Well, actually, it would be more like Uhtred, son of Waltheof. But that doesn't really have the same ring to it, does it? And thanks to the Last Kingdom, Uhtred is now a household name all across the world. And Uhtred of Bebbanburgh is one of the most recognizable central characters of any historical TV series ever created. Perplexingly though, many viewers are not aware that Uhtred of Bebbanburgh is actually based on a real historical figure named Uhtred of Bamburgh, better known to history as Uhtred the Bold. Aside from them both being important ealdormen and competent warriors, they also lived extraordinarily fascinating lives, and fittingly, Uhtred the Bold would also have a brutal and horrifying death. Therefore, in this video, we'll be focusing exclusively on how Uhtred the Bold died, and this is one of those surprisingly rare instances from history where there actually isn't much controversy or debate over what caused the death of the real Uhtred, as all medieval contemporary sources seem to share unanimity on the cause of death for this legendary ealdorman of Northumbria. However, before we dive into the last moments of Uhtred the Bold's life, I do think it is important to at least have some foundational knowledge on this historical figure's life, as the majority of individuals will be unfamiliar with the history of Uhtred of Bamburgh. So a little bit of prior knowledge will greatly assist in making the events leading up to Uhtred's death significantly more comprehensible. The exact year of Uhtred the Bold's birth is not clear, but I am going to make the assumption that he was born around the year 975 AD, as his first marriage occurred in 995, and 20 years of age seems like a plausible number for a nobleman to be getting married. It is also important to highlight that during most of Uhtred's life, Athelred the Unready was the King of England, and he received the moniker of the Unready as he was completely unprepared for the Viking invasion that would swiftly conquer much of England, and this subsequently would force Athelred into exile in Normandy. Uhtred would then swear loyalty to King Sweyn Forkbeard of Denmark as the new ruler of England in 1013, But King Forkbeard would pass away just a few weeks later, and Uhtred would betray his allegiance to the Vikings, and he would become a strong proponent of Athelred's claim to the throne. Unfortunately though, a few years later in 1016, Uhtred would regret supporting Athelred, as the son of King Forkbeard, Canute, was out for revenge, and he conquered much of Northumbria with his formidable Viking army. Uhtred had no choice but to surrender and acknowledge King Canute as the new monarch of England. However, Canute was not satisfied with this submission, and he summoned Uhtred to visit him for a peace negotiations meeting in Wighill. Uhtred was unable to refuse his liege lord and gathered a small contingency of bodyguards and proceeded towards the designated meeting place. Unbeknownst to Uhtred and his men, this peaceful meeting was just a ruse by Canute, who had his retainer Thurbrand the Hold ambush Uhtred and his 40 soldiers, resulting in all of them being cut down in this horrific betrayal. This death by ambush discourse is supported by many medieval sources which discuss the death of Uhtred the Bold, with the Chronicon et Chronicis, Historia Regum, Libellus de Exordio, de Obsessione Donelmi, and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles all linking the death of Uhtred to treachery perpetrated by King Canute and Thurbrand the Hold. However, it is important to emphasize that none of these sources are first-hand accounts of the events, but they are all written within 100 to 200 years of Uhtred's death, making their reliability highly compelling. Further strengthening the authenticity of these historical documents is the uniformity of events across all sources, as they all share nearly identical depictions of Uhtred's murder. The following excerpt from the De Obsessione Donelmi provides the following account of the betrayal that led to the assassination of Uhtred and his men. After King Aethelred's death, when Canute had laid hands upon the whole kingdom of England, he sent to the Earl ordering him to come to him as his new lord. He did so, having accepted safe conduct for his journey and return. On the appointed day, he entered the king's presence at Wighill to discuss terms of peace. Through the treachery of a powerful king's thane, Thurbrand, known as Hold, the king's soldiers who had hidden behind a curtain spread across the width of the hall, suddenly sprang out in mail and slaughtered the Earl and 40 of his chief men who had entered with him. As you can see, based on this historical document, it seems like that the common discourse during the medieval era was that Canute and Thurbrand had collectively worked together to indeed murder and assassinate Uhtred and 40 of his men using the false pretenses of a peaceful meeting. And another thing that I think is important to highlight is the fact that the year of Uhtred's death is also contentious, as 1016 is just the best guess that contemporary historians were able to deduce based on the information they had available. The assumption is that since Uhtred and many other earls of Northumbria submitted to King Canute in 1016, it is logical to conclude that Canute would have assassinated Uhtred and any other problematic vassals soon after he was ascended to the throne. Of course, these are all just hypotheses by medieval historians, and it is very possible that Uhtred the Bold may have perished at any other point during the nearly 20-year reign of Canute. But there is little to no evidence which supports or contradicts the 1016 year of death theory for Uhtred the Bold. Another point of contention in regards to the death of Uhtred is the actual location of where his murder may have occurred, as contemporary sources state that Wighill is where Uhtred was summoned, but there is no direct translation of Wighill to any city in modern day England. So the two most plausible locations proposed are Wighill, which was referred to as Wishell in medieval England, or Worrell, a city near Sheffield, which was referred to as Wighill in the past. In my personal opinion, the spellings of Wighill share much greater similarities with the spelling of Wyhill rather than Wishell, and that Worrell may be the most likely final resting place of Uhtred. Unfortunately though, until the day we discover Uhtred the Bold's body, the task of being able to definitively identify the location of Uhtred's assassination is going to be nearly impossible. So that is all the information that we have on the death of Uhtred the Bold, the inspiration behind Uhtred Ragnarsson from the Last Kingdom. We have been able to conclude that Uhtred was most certainly killed in an ambush set up by Canute and Thurbrand, but the exact date and location of his death will perhaps forever be shrouded in mystery and legend. So let me know in the comments down below if you found this video to be interesting and what other historical figures' deaths you would like to know more about. And remember, if you want to learn about the death of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel Historical Exit, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.